Hey everybody, this is Warboss Fitz. Across the internet, I'm starting to see stories pop up from people talking about why they left the hobby of Warhammer 40k, or why they started looking into other games to spend their time, money, and imagination on. I walked away from 40k and I never really thought about when it happened, so I made a timeline of the things that I can remember and where I was in my life when they happened. Now this is just my story. Yours will be different. You may still love Games Workshop, or you may be somewhere along the path that I took, and that's fine. I don't want to discourage you from your hobby. If you're a 40k player and you love the game, I'm happy for you. This is for players who might need that little nudge to see all the rest that the miniature war game hobby has to offer. But here we go. How did a 20-plus year avid 40k player, and when I say avid, I mean played every weekend for 2 decades, go from running tournaments and narrative events to not even downloading the free rules for the current edition? Don't worry, it wasn't this. I fell off before that happened. I was a player from the dawn of 3rd edition. I got my first models in 2nd, but I didn't really get into a groove until we all saw the Black Templars stacked up on the box art. I was drawn into the Grimdark. As an impressionable young lad, I was drawn into the hopeless last stands, the futile heroics, characters that spit in the face of death, and the I'm going to take you with me attitudes of the lore. The story sections of the codexes and the White Dwarf magazines were full of self-sacrifice and 80s action movie bravado. I loved every bit of it. My first army was Dark Angels, mostly because my friends had taken all the other chapters and I couldn't play the same chapters as them. That would just be lame. I'm not going to talk about all of my old armies. I've made at least one of every army over the years, some of them multiple times. Just the ones that were at particular time periods, and the Dark Angels are going to play a role a bit later. So fast forward a decade from when I started. I was happily giving GW money to play with their toy soldiers fighting across every planet in their galaxy. Then the first chink in the armor of my fandom happened. Chapter House. Not the lawsuits, not the court case, it was what GW did in response. Once they were told that they can't stop third-party companies from making proxy models for units that they don't make, instead of making the models, they just removed all the rules. It's also a time period where conversions took a backseat in White Dwarf. Scratch builds were just removed. If it didn't have GW parts, you just didn't see it. They started to strip back imagination from their hobbyists. I was playing Dark Eldar when the codex changed. All of a sudden, most of the special characters were gone. No more Vect, no more Malaise, no more Baron. The army I built was based around Duke Silicius, with gunboats of Trueborn shooting poisoned rounds out of the raiders. That was gone overnight. So to keep playing with the army I had built, I would have to buy more units to bring it back up to tournament size again. The names of all the armies changed, codexes across the board lost units. The game felt less open-ended and started to feel like it narrowed. But being the good customer I was, I rolled with it and decided to make a different army. The End Times. I had stayed away from Warhammer Fantasy for the most part, dipping my toe in it occasionally with some Bretonnians or the occasional Chaos units. I never really committed to it, and those models would eventually find their way into my 40k armies as conversions and kit bashes. But then the End Times started. The atmosphere in my local store changed, and the hype train started to pick up steam. GW was releasing books and new lore for fantasy that the players had not seen in years. Fantasy armies started to get taken out, dusted off, and hit the tables again. Veteran rank and flank players were showing up and playing regularly, and damn it, I got bit. For years, I had wanted to make something completely different from my 40k armies, for a change of pace and to try some new techniques. Toying with the idea of a Wood Elf army, the natural shapes and colors. They were a hard contrast to the hard lines and industrial feel of 40k. With a renewed interest in the game, I jumped in. I bought an army in November of 2014 and started building. Then Games Workshop killed it. The whole game. Killed it so hard, I couldn't even sell my models secondhand. Nobody wanted models for a dead system. more cracks in my rose-tinted glasses. Then Age of Sigmar came out. The first edition was such a fever dream at the beginning. It's hard to explain if you weren't there to experience it. Let's just say we had some guys who were growing mustaches just to go first. And there was no points level. Like the game had no points. Oh yeah, and the wood elves I had built were no longer wood elves. The army just didn't even exist in Age of Sigmar. Fun times. I still couldn't sell them. Let's jump back to 40k. The Skitarii Codex came out and there was much rejoicing. I wanted to be the weird tech support for the Imperium. So again, I jumped in with both feet. New army high and all that. 7th edition started great, and then the wheels fell off. The detachment system being a blatant way for GW to maximize sales to single armies by letting you bring free units if you build your army a certain way. You better believe I drank that Kool-Aid and was running the we get free war gear because screw you detachment and laying the smackdown. I knew I was being propped up by my wallet because I bought one of every unit and a knight. I knew on a deeper level that what we were seeing was a pay-to-win in a tabletop game. My rose-tinted glasses cracked a little more. This is the part where I say the most terrifying words to some of the gamers out there. Here is where I met a girl. She tolerated my hobby though, so she was the one, the love of my life. Then my professional life started to tank. I was left all alone in a job that was supposed to have 5 people in it, and the workload and stress was killing me. I was able to get out to the game store sometimes, but it wasn't as much as I wanted to. After a year of this, she gave me the option of getting out and starting all over with a new job at a new place. At the time, I was so beaten down by life, I said yes. So I moved across America, south to north, 1,500 miles. Or for the rest of the world, that's 2,400 kilometers. And to do so, I needed to rent a moving truck and drive it all the way there. The problem was that I had amassed so much gaming stuff that I could have filled the truck with that alone. So I made a deal with one of the gaming group. They got my entire model collection except for my Mechanicus army, because I gotta bring something to play when I get there, right? He had to make 4 trips to get it all. So off we go to the snow-covered north. I was able to find a game store and nestled into the gaming group there to keep the hijinks going. Enter the Primarchs, the Fall of Cadia, and the Primaris Marines. This is where we're going to focus entirely on the lore and how it shattered those rose-colored glasses I had that were still holding on. Constant price rises definitely didn't help, but I've already done videos on the cost of 40k. You can find them on the channel. So Magnus was the first Primarch out of the gate. The way he was leaked and revealed I thought was a fun marketing technique, and it worked. But then the Gathering Storm happened. Cadia was under siege by Abaddon. Again, I could have swore we did this already. I guess Games Workshop forgot about that worldwide campaign from years ago. It felt weird, seeing now what I recognize as the first big retcon of 40k. I can get past it. This is Games Workshop, they must have a good reason. What followed was some of the most slapdash fanfic writing I have ever seen. The character of Call especially. Playing Mechanicus and seeing what that character was doing in the lore was mind-numbing. He breaks all the established tenets and laws of the Mechanicus. He was picked by the Emperor and instructed to improve on his designs, because the God Emperor, who in the lore in the last years they have bastardized his character, he knew that this tech priest could do a better job than him. Call had been making hundreds of thousands of Space Marines in secret and amassing entire Forge World tithes to outfit them, all while the Imperium is being slowly eroded from the outside. I mean, there are retcons and then there are committee-driven upendings to the story. This was the most Gary Stu self-insert I could think of. This point in the story is where I got introduced to one-page rules. This is not a one-page rules video. If you want to know more about it, I have many videos on the channel. You can check those out. What happened was that I kept the lore of 40k in my head while I played OPR because I still liked the lore and I wanted to follow the storyline and see the payoff for stories I remember from my youth. I could look past one character to move the story along to whatever they were going to do next, My view was a little dimmed, but if they could recapture that spark they had in the past, I would have been right back in. As far as the Primaris go, I liked the models when they were released, but what they have become has been a joke. If they were an upgrade to regular Marines, I would have been all for it. But instead, we got cookie-cutter models that all carry different styles of Nerf guns, who have no idea how mixed fire teams work. I never bought any, because between the time I moved and started over and the release of the Primaris Marines, I had built another Space Marine army of Carcharodons, and I'd be damned if GW did another end times to an army I just built. Then more lore changes. The Plague War that lasted 200 years after the fall of Cadia, oops, retcon to only be 12. The Great Rift that split the galaxy, it had massive storytelling potential just built right into it. What have they done with it? Nothing. It's barely an inconvenience. The shift from freeform storytelling to have a named character from the game because there always has to be marketing involved. In the past, when you read a novel, you didn't quite know how it would turn out, and that was what made it exciting. Now if you have a named character show up, the story loses all stakes. You know they're going to win. If you have two named characters, you know it's going to devolve into a Saturday morning G.I. Joe story where one gets beat up and then runs away yelling, "I'll get you next time." You want more Primarchs, you say? Here's Angron punching starships. Isn't that so hella cool? We're going to make a 5th Chaos God, guys. Here's Vashtor. He's going to look cool for a little bit and then take a big drink from the dumbass juice box like all those other Chaos characters. Hey, the Lion is waking up. The Lion. Like the Primarch of my first army, the Dark Angels. See, I told you they would matter in the story. He is the destroyer of civilizations, the Emperor's executioner. He's going to level the playing field in the galaxy, ripping and tearing his way through the stars, leaving broken chaos forces in his wake. I had a bit of hope that those rose-tinted glasses would stay on my face. And what did we get? An old man who is tired of fighting. What the absolute... Right there. That is where my joy for the lore of 40k died. I stopped reading their books. I stopped looking at articles. I even stopped listening to lore YouTubers. Once the lore lost me, I just didn't care anymore. I had reached total apathy to whatever came out of Nottingham. The torch of imagination and creativity had been passed to a new generation of writers, just for it to be dunked in a barrel of bland fan fiction. I decided right there that I would write my own lore for my own armies and play in my own universes. With what I saw that passed as professional story writing, now I couldn't do worse than that. This is the main reason why the channel exists. To spread the word that you can use your own imagination to make your own stories, to play with your own models however you want. So now I don't even care what Games Workshop does to their IP. I've made videos in the past where I've heard that GW did something dumb, like removing units or cutting out whole armies. My video titled GW Did Something, that was my outstretched hand to wargamers who didn't have anywhere to play with their models after the army went up in smoke. It just so happened to coincide with the whole female custodes thing. So the comments were hilarious, calling me an incel misogynist, even though the video was recorded and edited before that was even a thing, and I didn't reference it once. I understand now when I hear people complaining about tourists in 40k. They come in with their minds already made up, prepped to scream at you if you don't love everything the company produces. I'm sure there will be the same comments on this video. I'm looking forward to it. And that is the story of how I fell out of love with 40k. There is one more big thing that happened, and I didn't slot it in the main timeline here because I'm not quite sure when it happened, but that is the retcon of Ollanius Pious, a guardsman that was the pinnacle of the human spirit in the face of insurmountable odds, a human standing before gods. He didn't cower. He didn't flee. He looked into the face of death and he spat at it. For him, there was no slipping quietly into the night. He is the rage against the dying of the light made flesh. Then GW had to go change the story to being a Terminator, and then a Custodes, bastardizing the whole point of the story that made it something magical, and tearing away the epic moments that made grimdark the best possible genre of fiction. In honor of Guardsman Ollanius Pious, I want to read an excerpt that puts it much better than I can. Look at this man. He spent months fighting a grueling war in which his enemies are demigods allied with demons. And now he's found himself in the closest thing to hell that he's ever known. He probably wasn't even supposed to be here. He just ended up in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Somehow he has survived horrors beyond comprehension to make his way to the very bridge of Horus's flagship. He saw an angel call upon Horus to answer for his crimes, and he saw that angel die as messily as any guardsman. His emperor, who he so fervently believes is a god incarnate, even if he's not supposed to, lies mortally wounded, and Horus, perhaps, has taken a moment to gloat before he strikes the killing blow. And yet, there he is, standing all alone, between the war master of everything humanity ever fought against, and the greatest beings amongst all humanity, if even not godhood. His armor is slightly more effective than tissue paper, his weapon slightly more powerful than a flashlight. A single electrified claw from Horus's weapon is bigger than his entire body. He stands before a being infused by the dark gods with incalculable power that can and will obliterate his soul with no more effort than it would to swat a gnat. Nothing he can do could possibly make a difference. He could run. He could turn his weapon upon himself. He could give in to the insidious whispers that echo from the ship's corridors into his mind. Ollanius Pious does the duty his emperor requires of him. He dies standing and holds the fucking line.